Things Podcast. Hey, Phantomaniacs, welcome to the newest episode of the Needless Things Podcast, where we talk about toys, movies, music, and all manner of pop culture dorkery. I am your host, Dave, and today is the last of the Dragon Con 2018 panels that I have to share with you. I've been parsing these out sparingly because typically what I do is I'll slot one of these in when we're a little short on time or something has fallen through as far as scheduling goes and I need a good episode. And that has definitely happened this week. It has been an insane week after an insane weekend. And there was just there was no recording a new episode for this week. So this is it. This is the last of them. This is all I've got. And this is one of my favorites because this is the Joy of Joe panel, and it features mostly people who contributed to the Joy of Joe book, which I am one of those people. This is a book that was put together by Jim Beard, and it features myself, of course, with an essay about my love of G.I. Joe and how I got into it way back in the day, the toy line. But it also features such luminaries as Brandon Jerwa, Fabian Nicieza, Jim Beard himself, of course, contributed something. Our pal Bobby Nash, our friends Mark Maddox and James Palmer, and let's see here. Oh, look at that. Toys for a Troublemaker by Dave West, immediately followed by These Are Not Dolls by Jerry Ordway. What? And then Justin Bell and all kinds of other great folks who love G.I. Joe and who wanted to write about G.I. Joe and contributed to this book that I'm holding I'm holding a book that I contributed to in my hands right now. I am a published writer. It's wild, and you can go on Amazon, just look for Joy of Joe. You can order yourself up a copy, and it's awesome. If you're a fan of G.I. Joe, this is an absolute must-have because it's all kinds of different fans, literally people who have actually contributed to the G.I. Joe mythology, and people like myself who just adore G.I. Joe as a franchise. So it covers the spectrum of relatable G.I. Joe experiences and people who actually were part of that. So highly recommend it. Go to Amazon, look for Joy of Joe, order yourself a copy. And today's episode is a panel featuring some of these contributors that were recorded live at Dragon Con, and it's a lot of fun. It's awesome. We had a great time talking about G.I. Joe, and it was directed by Jim, so the flavor of the book, if you will, is there. Or moderated by Jim. So it's definitely a good sampling of the book. It's almost a companion to the book, I would go so far as to say. So there you go. Joy of Joe is on today, and you should go and buy yourself a copy of the book. Now let's move on to... as the hosts of the Major Wrestling Figure podcast call it, housekeeping, which I have always just referred to as the intro, so that's fine too. So this week, this crazy week, first of all, MomoCon starts, well, for you guys yesterday, for me tomorrow. I will be possibly, I'm throwing a possibly in front of everything that I say during this intro because... yesterday, I messed my back up again, and it was it's not the worst it's ever been, but when it happened, I knew it more than I have ever known it before, and if you're getting old like me, then you know about your back may not be your problem, but maybe your knees are messed up, maybe you've got a hip or a shoulder that gives you trouble from time to time, and sometimes you wake up in the morning and you're like, what did I do? And sometimes when you've done something. This was one of those times when I knew something had happened. I was in the shower and I felt it felt like somebody had twisted up a bunch of paper towels, wet them, and then just yanked them apart. Like, that was the sensation all across my lower back. Like, it felt like a wet tear. It was extremely unpleasant, as you might imagine, and very concerning. But it didn't matter. I had, and at the time, that how back issues work, and the reason sometimes you don't know what you did to mess up your back is the problems don't always happen right away. So I had that sensation, and then just kind of like it didn't start giving me problems right away. I just knew something was not good. So the remainder of that day was my parents being in town for my son's graduation from 5th grade. So I have to continue getting ready. And like I said, it's not totally hurting yet. So we went to the church, had the 5th grade graduation that was interminable because there was exactly one kid out of those like 200 or whatever that I cared about at all. And had to sit through a slideshow. Oh my gosh! But it was very nice, and it was the whole time I was sitting through it, I was thinking, well, this is huge for like putting myself back in my 11-year-old frame of mind, which is something that I'm sure will shock you guys. I'm pretty good at doing. So to him, it's this huge event. And to me, don't get me wrong, to me, it's this huge event. It's a big accomplishment. He graduated on the honor roll, which is great. I'm very, very proud. And so it was like, his whole life of events or ceremonies or things like that is ahead of him, and this was really kind of the first big one. So it was, in that context, it was very exciting. So anyway, I'm sitting in a chair that looks like it would be hideously uncomfortable, but it's actually not too bad. The problem comes when you stand up at the end and you move your muscles again. So I get up, we go eat with my parents, and I've talked about them before on the show. I love my parents. My parents love me. I genuinely believe that they did everything they were capable of to try and make me the best person I could be. They had nothing but the best intentions. They were not, abusive or bad or in any way. They just were not in every circumstance totally equipped to be reasonable, supportive parents. And they, being around them, sometimes they are still those, how parents are, man. Parents can get to you like nobody else can. So I'm already a little cranky because my back is starting to stiffen up. I don't feel great. We go out to eat, and we have a good time. We go to this place called Freddy's. That's awesome. I'm getting into way too much detail, but it's honestly, it's because this is right before work, and all I'm doing is sitting here thinking about going to work for 12 hours with my back feeling like my back feels right now, and sitting in the chairs that are really not sufficient for 12 hours of sitting. Well, although we do have standing desks now, which is nice. But anyway, had a very, very long day yesterday. Went and ate with the parents. Went and bought or my parents ended up buying a drum kit and a starter drum set for my son because that is his interest, and I think he's going to be awesome at it. So that was a whole thing. If I will say this, if you've never had the experience of loading a drum kit into the back of your vehicle with your parents' assistance, with your parents' guidance and instruction, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. And then got home and had about an hour before I had to get up again and go rehearse for 5/5 of The Princess Bride, which I spoke about last week, I think. It's part of the Atlanta Fringe Festival, which you can Google Atlanta Fringe Festival and read all about that. And you can even Google 5/5 of The Princess Bride and find that event. It's on Facebook. You can buy tickets now, and it's going to be awesome. 5 different performance groups are doing segments of The Princess Bride, resulting in the totality of the film being represented in 5 different ways. It's crazy, and I am working with Mr. Bo Brown and Matt Nitchie, who you may know as the Sci-Fi janitors. Very exciting for me to be working with live performance professionals in that way. Not that I haven't done my share of performing live in front of people, but it doesn't quite compare to these masters of puppetry. So anyway, I had to go rehearse for that for a few hours, and I'm very, very excited about it. And actually, when you're doing something that fulfilling that you love, it's easier to work through inconveniences or whatever is going on with you that may make things you don't 100% enjoy more aggravating. So that was pretty great. I enjoyed that. I think I mentioned my trainee at work has taken over, so that is no longer an issue, but it does mean that I'm shadowing him for the next 2 weeks, and that's not super awesome. And then, as I mentioned, tomorrow for me, yesterday for you guys, MomoCon starts. I will be covering it as press, at least that is the plan. I will get up tomorrow, again, before work, like today, and head downtown to get my press badge. I'm not super excited about walking around the World Congress Center in the state that I'm in right now, because I don't like being cranky, and this level of discomfort I know makes me a little cranky, and interacting with other people when I am in this state is very difficult. I don't have the easiest time interacting with other people in the first place. And when you throw a not great back into the equation, you're uncomfortable. You're sweating a little more than you normally are. You are having to move about in a different way from your normal comfortable gait. It just makes everything a little worse. So at this point, I certainly do feel obligated to go down there and cover MomoCon, but my level of excitement has gone down a little bit just because I don't know what state I'm going to be in tomorrow or Friday when I'm planning on going down there for as much of the day as I can, and potentially Saturday, but I just, you guys, I've pushed through these kinds of things before. As a matter of fact, I've done it at Dragon Con, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully, by the time you're listening to this, everything will have eased up, and we'll all be good, and I'll be hanging out at MomoCon with all the kids, and maybe their youthful, happy energy will heal my tortured back. So there you go. What else? I'd like to put something else over this week. Granted, I feel like that's enough of an intro to a little window into my unfortunate life this week. Well, I say unfortunate life. That's not true. The back is the only bad thing. Everything else has been fantastic. Yesterday was, despite its tribulations, yesterday was absolutely awesome because I just got to hang out with my family all day, and that's kind of really all I want to do. And then, later on, the 5/5 of The Princess Bride. I'm so excited for that. So, I mean, honestly, it's been a very good week, except for the torn fibers in my back, or pulled, or whatever it is that happens to them that makes me a cranky hunchback. So I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. If you're going to MomoCon, keep an eye out for a hobbling giant guy, probably in a suit. I don't know. That's the other thing, is I just want to be comfortable. You may be getting dressed down. Like all of my videos and coverage may be just of other things. You may not get a picture of your old pal Phantom at MomoCon. I may be in severe comfort mode when I'm down there. But everybody have a fun weekend. Do great things. Oh, the Casket Creatures are playing Saturday night. As of now, I'm absolutely planning on being there. It's at the Sweetwater in Duluth. It's a very special show. You can find out about it on Facebook. That's my number one priority. That's the thing I plan to do if I do anything at all. But it's also going to depend on if this back situation has eased up by then or not. because I definitely can't go stand around at a show at a smoke-filled club for a few hours in this situation. But lots of stuff going on this weekend. It's Memorial Day weekend, obviously, so everybody please do be safe, be responsible, have fun, do some dumb shit, but don't do dumb shit that's so dumb that you can end up getting yourself in any kind of significant trouble or injury. Or don't do anything that might throw your back out. So that's more than enough of that, you guys. I'm sorry to drone on and on about my personal issues, but let me just tell you, as I'm sitting in this not awesome chair, they are more prevalent than anything else. So let's move on to the Joy of Joe, live from Dragon Con 2018.
I'm going to hand it off to an awesome batch of individuals. You guys do your thing.
Not us? I'm not going. Thank you guys for coming out. I'm going to eschew the microphone.
Oh.
I'm going to just try to talk loud. Thank you all for being here. I honestly thought there was going to be maybe like 4 or 5 people in this room. This is very...
Oh, not in this room.
Yeah, in this room.
That's not happening, mister.
So, prepare yourself. We're going to do a deep dive into childhood on this panel today, in one of the joys of childhood, namely the joy of G.I. Joe. This is a topic that is very, very special to me. It's so special that I actually... My name is Jim Beard, by the way. Nice to meet you. This is my first Dragon Con, and this has been one hell of an experience. All these guys have made it so cool for me. I wanted to try to put my own love for this toy into book form, and it took about 2 years, and I finally achieved it. I achieved it with the help of some very good friends, 30 of them, 29, I'm one of those, that came together and helped me put this book together. We all share at least one thing, and that's the love of this incredible toy that has lasted since 1964. I want to let you know, yes, as Ralphie says, this is a crummy commercial. I have 5 copies left. This is all my copies. I have a table in Artist's Alley, but I brought them all with me. If you're interested, I do have some. I love G.I. Joe so much that I finally put out my own kids' book, and it's actually inspired by G.I. Joe. The kids in it have a toy, a thinly veiled G.I. Joe, but don't tell Hasbro, called Adventure Sam, and their little backyard adventure with it. I have a couple of copies of that with me, too. It's called The Secret Action Figure Room. So, enough about me. I know you're really interested, but, and as you can see, this is, where my sensibilities lie here. Okay, I'm sorry. All real American Hero fans, I can tell. I want the panel to introduce themselves one by one, but when you do that, tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do, but I also want you to tell everybody about your first time with G.I. Joe.
He was gentle.
And by the way,
an experience.
This is not going to be just about us and our love for G.I. Joe, but we are definitely going to want to hear about everybody's coming up through childhood with G.I. Joe. So let us start all the way down on the end.
Hi, I'm Dave West. I host the Needless Things podcast, as well as anything else that has a microphone that somebody will be foolish enough to let me get behind. I love G.I. Joe, Real American Hero. I have deep respect for the franchise in its entirety, but that's where I found it. And you'll notice, actually, I've got my little Pimp Destro and color-changing Zartan pins on today. My first G.I. Joe experience... I've told this story many times, but I'm a little frazzled after a busy weekend. But my mom took me into an Eckerd drugstore, and they had a spinner rack, one of the wire spinner racks of action figures, and the packaging is what caught my eye. It was the first series of Joes, and it was these dynamic poses.
What
this
year was
really
this?
beautiful art. This would have been, I guess, 82.
Okay.
Wow,
I mean, this is first year.
Yeah, literally
Real
the first
American
series
Girl.
of Joes. They had not been in stores. This was the first time I had seen them at all. And
Yeah.
No arm cut.
gorgeous. Yeah, there no kung fu grip. Just the swivel necks. This is the original. Snake Eyes, Stalker,
Snake Eyes,
Short
Stalker,
Fuse.
Scarlet, Short Fuse.
Do it.
Snake Eyes, Stalker, Scarlet, Short Fuse,
Grunt.
Grunt, Breaker, Hawk, Grand Slam, Flash, Zap, Clutch, Stealer. No, not Stealer. Sorry. Is that right? No. Stealer. Yeah, Stealer. See, I don't even trust my own knowledge.
Stealer, because he was with the tank.
Yeah, and then the Cobra Enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all of them. Is that all? Yeah.
But I at the time, Star Wars was my thing. I started with Migos, but Star Wars was my big toy line at the time. But these figures, that package art was so dynamic and interesting to me. They clearly had more joints than the Star Wars figures, which, even as a kid, I was an articulation whore. So I needed the knees and elbows and hips, and they interact better with vehicles and whatever else. So my mind was blown. My mom let me buy a couple. I believe it's in my story in the book which ones they were.
And then an adult male appeared to you and said, "I'm you from the future, and you need to buy 2 of each one of these and put one away."
If only.
Right.
No, actually, if my mom had seen adult me talking to 6-year-old me,
Yeah.
I'd probably be in prison still. But anyway, because my dad was in the military, he was very supportive of this new toy habit, and I ended up with basically all of the Joes that came out for the next 5 or 6 years because, I mean, he loved it. He loved the franchise. So that was one of the things that me and my dad shared was I loved them because they were great toys. He loved them because, in the beginning at least, they were a solid representation of his military career.
Cool. Thank you. Next.
My name is Michael French. I run the Retro Blasting YouTube channel. We do deconstructions of everything Gen X nostalgia from Jaws to Jurassic Park, and we've done a number of videos about G.I. Joe that some of you may have seen, and if not, please consider subscribing to our channel. My love of G.I. Joe started in 1982 when I was given for my birthday Clutch and the Vamp Mark I. We didn't know it as the Mark I, then it was just the Vamp. It was the G.I. Joe Jeep for Real American Hero with straight arm clutch. I had that one too.
Yeah,
and but then there was a second first, which happened a few years later, because while I had Clutch and Flash and Grunt and the APC, the amphibious personnel carrier, I was really still into Star Wars at the time. And then I got a comic book that was handed to me by a family friend. It was very well loved and used. G.I. Joe issue number 61. And it was Stalker, Quick Kick, and Snow Job being left behind in the Eastern Bloc while Outback tried to get back to the friendly lines, outside of enemy lines, to get them out. And that's when I realized that G.I. Joe's mythology was in those comic books. And then suddenly the action figures that I had so much more relevance. And so then I really became a G.I. Joe fan at that point.
Were you reading comics before that?
I was reading comics on and off, but not anything quite seriously.
Okay.
And then G.I. Joe sent me into collecting comics.
I'm a huge comic book person. I'm always curious about how people get into it, and that's what a wonderful gateway drug.
Yes,
to the
I've still got that issue with extra staples in it and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's
great. That's very great. James.
My name is James Palmer. I write science fiction and pulp adventure. I've got a series of it's a Shared World Cold War giant monster anthology series that I created with this gentleman down here on the end, Mr. Jim Beard. And I first got into G.I. Joe, I guess with the action figures, and then really with the cartoon. Watched it every weekday afternoon. I loved the toys. We couldn't afford really expensive big toys growing up, so the Joes were perfect because they were the $6, and you get the little thing, and they've got all the little accessories and stuff, and you can amass a collection of them fairly quickly. So yeah, that's kind of my, I guess, story of Joe.
Bobby.
I'm Bobby Nash. I write. Sorry, my voice is about gone, so forgive the crackiness.
It's Sunday at Dragon Con.
Yes, forgive the crackiness.
We forgive you.
I write novels, comics, all kinds of stuff. So I don't remember which came first. I remember my memories of G.I. Joe. There's two of them. I'm not sure which comes first. I remember we used to have a Target or Walmart-like store called Zaire.
Yep.
Around.
Yes.
Yep.
And I remember going into Zaire and the line, like the one aisle that was nothing but like G.I. Like you said, the packaging is like nothing but like orange and yellow like bomb blast going off down up and down the aisle, and begging my mother for Snake Eyes because he looked cool.
Everybody likes Snake
But
Eyes.
I don't remember if that came
And
first.
she said he has no panties. Why would you want that thing?
But I don't remember if that came first, getting Snake Eye came first, or if seeing the ads for the comic came first. Because remember they were doing the animated ad, it was like a cartoon that would then morph into whatever Marvel comic was on sale. And the covers were so cool. And I do remember getting like the first, there was a time there they were packaging those together, I guess with the toys where you could get them in a 3-pack. And I remember getting like the first 3 G.I. Joes, and I was hooked. And so, but I don't remember which one of those comes first. It's
That's part of the beauty of G.I. Joe is the symbiotic relationship and between the toys and the comics and the cartoons. That really just led the way to what is so standard today. You walk into a toy store and there's not an original toy, what I would call an original toy, that's not connected somehow to something, like that.
And then the beauty of it too. I mean, I recently watched the Toys That Made Us, the G.I. Joe episode.
If you haven't watched at least the G.I. Joe episode of the Toys That Made Us, seek this out.
Yeah, it's on Netflix.
Yeah, but I think
it's a little snarky at some point, but it is really done very, very well.
But I think one of the things that helped with that, when we're talking about the mythology and all that, and how closely it's tied together, is the fact that with not just G.I. Joe, but Transformers also, they went to Marvel Comics and says, we have these guys. They have no names. We don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
We need somebody to do that knows how to tell a story. Enter Larry Hama, who gives these characters who, on the face of it, with just their name and their accessories, are pretty generic. And he takes these, what could be just generic characters, and gives them life, gives them a backstory, gives them history, to where we really care about them more than just for what they look like, but who they are.
My story's a little different from your guys's, and I think that's part of it is because of a few years difference between us. I was not a real American hero guy. I was actually an adventure team guy. Actually, I was, if you really want to get technical about it, an adventures of guy for the very short time that existed. My first time was actually captured on film, and no, it's not on YouTube, so don't go looking for it. But it's a photo on the back of the book is actually the Christmas that I received my very first G.I. Joe. I have no memory of when I found out that G.I. Joe was a thing. I was born in 1965. G.I. Joe came out in 1964. It had already existed. I really don't have any memory of it. Now, my dad, he instilled in me everything that I love today, pulps and comics and all these different great TV shows and movies. So he was probably on the lookout for things that he knew that I would like. In Christmas of '69, I was 4.5 years old, and I did receive my very first G.I. Joe, which was the G.I. Joe astronaut with the space capsule. To say that I was in 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th heaven, it would be an understatement. I won't ruin my little essay in here, but there was a dramatic event that happened when I got my first G.I. Joe. He was in this really weird transition period that the soldier G.I. Joe of the 60s was, he was being mustered out. The Vietnam War caused some concerns to Hasbro, and they did a makeover on him, and they turned him into an adventurer for 69, 70 or 68, 69, into 70 a little bit. It was called The Adventures of G.I. Joe, and suddenly he, wore pith helmets and hunted alligators and things like that, instead of, storming the beach at Normandy. My first G.I. Joe was part of that. There was no flocked hair at that point. It was a painted hair G.I. Joe, and he was a redhead like me, which was really cool. I projected myself on him. I realize that now. And then shortly after that, they introduced lifelike hair, and the Adventure Team clicked in. So I do really consider myself an Adventure Team fan. But I have such huge respect and admiration for Real American Hero. It is so important. I do know some guys my age who would have nothing to do with Real American Hero, and to me that's not right. I don't have to collect it to love it. It saved G.I. Joe. Mm-hmm. G.I. Joe, the whole thing fell apart after the midpoint of the 70s. We won't talk about Super Joe. Super Joe is something that we will not talk about.
Can we just briefly, because
Are you going to force me to talk about Super Joe?
Here's the thing.
Go ahead, Dave.
Until I was... Because to write this, I wanted to go back and sort of check some facts and look at a couple of things for my entry in this. And I did not even know Super Joe, outside of Joe Crow, existed until... I sat down to work for this book.
Yeah.
So I briefly, give us the elevator pitch.
77, if I'm not mistaken. Petroleum costs were very high. There was a lot of concern about the plastic that it took to make a 12-inch action figure and all the things that a 12-inch action figure needed, the equipment, the vehicles, and all of that. And they hatched a plan to make G.I. Joe 6, 7, 8 inches tall. A lot smaller, obviously, 3-4 inches there. And Star Wars, 1977, thereabout. And they gave it this kind of science fiction-y vibe, and they called him Super Joe. It looked a lot like the Adventure Team guy, had a beard and, the whole thing, but some of the worst packaging art you'd ever want to imagine, like this sort of stupid 70s posterized style. It was terrible, and it lasted about a year or two, and it just fell apart. And he slept until 1982, and Real American Hero saved G.I. Joe. We're talking about G.I. Joe now because of Real American Hero. He's kind of sleeping a little bit right now too. I know that, but I don't think that's gonna last. I think he meant so much to boys and girls for so many years that's it's got to happen again. They're not going to let that incredible legacy and legend fall apart. I want to ask really quick, because we've been talking a lot about history here, and of course. Coming up through the history, I knew it, but for the Real American Hero guys, as a child, you love these toys, the little figures, the size inspired by the Star Wars figures,
Right.
It makes a lot of sense. Not as much money to make them, can sell them fairly cheaply. Did you at that point have any sense of history? Like, did you know that there was a previous generation's G.I. Joe? In 12-inch form, because I've talked to some guys who some of those were still lying around somewhere. Big brother, maybe even a father. I don't know what happens. I'm curious to know if there was any sense of history at that time. Anybody want to jump in on that?
I was vaguely aware. I have an uncle that's like 7 years older than me, so I would play with his old, hand-me-down Star Wars toys. This, early '80s. So, and I think he had a couple lying around, and I knew it. I kind of knew about it, but I had already, played with the Real American Hero Joes, and I like those a lot better. I hated when my grandmother called them dolls. Yeah.
But you love it now.
Yeah, well, they're still not dolls.
They're dolls.
They're
I didn't see you playing with your dolls again, sir.
Look up the definition of doll.
I know.
In Webster's, and you'll. Anybody else want to?
Yeah. My next door neighbor, they had two kids, two boys. One of them was much older. He was going into high school, and then the other kid was about a year older than me. And so he and I were more contemporary. Like, he would get the second Vamp, and then I would try and follow that with a Sky Striker, and he would, whatever. But his older brother, suddenly one day when he went off to college, he brought all of his toys out from the top of the closet in his bedroom and gave them to his younger brother. And when he did, this treasure trove of yesteryear came out, including large format G.I. Joes from the Adventure Team era. And so I saw the real beards and the Kung Fu grip hands and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, his brother Roger, who was the kid I played with, was very rough on toys and quickly trashed all of them after they came out in pristine condition. At the time, I had no control over that. They were his property, not mine. But it did make me aware that there were larger Joes from before.
I know Dave was shaking his head. Oh, I'm sorry, Bobby keeps trying to talk. Bobby.
That's okay. Well, I was gonna say, I wasn't aware of history at the moment of it. But I mean, I didn't really know much about the tall Joes, but except for like my father or my uncles were always going, these used to be a lot taller.
Yeah.
You know how we are.
Back in my day.
When I was a kid.
Yeah.
I'll always gladly play second fiddle to award-winning Bobby Nash. No problem. No, I had no idea. I didn't have any family members or friends or anything that were of the age to have had the original Joes. Yeah. So it was all the small stuff for me. And really quickly, I'd like to correct myself, who's the only person I'll ever correct. I said Kung Fu grip earlier when I meant swivel arm battle grip.
You knew what you meant.
I know, but I need you to know that I know.
Because I would have jumped all over. Again, with this transition period that I came in on, they were actually at that time selling off the military era stuff, in bargain bins. One of the first things that I got, I think it was like the next Christmas. Not only did I start to get some Adventure Team stuff for my G.I. Joe, but I got a military police set with the Ike jacket and the white helmet and the baton and all of that. So I had this weird conglomeration of military era and Adventure Team stuff kind of mixed together there, because there was that really weird period in there. So, were you asking a question? You want to ask a question? Yeah, I thought you were raising your hand.
Yeah, I was going to... Did any one of you had that doll that would talk, pull the string and say something?
I had a friend who had one, but I never had one myself. I actually own two right now that still talk. A very good friend of mine gave me his military era G.I. Joe, and he still talks. I don't pull the string, anymore. Like once every 10 years, maybe, just to say, hey, it still talks. And then I do actually have a talking G.I. Joe Commander now, but I did not have that when I was a kid. I owned one G.I. Joe throughout my entire childhood, and that was my very first one with the red hair. I did have a Mike Power, and I had Bullet Man, but they're not, they're G.I. Joe, but they're not really G.I. Joe.
Mark Maddox, who I interviewed for my contribution to the book, he had one. He was telling me about that.
Yeah.
Actually had it as a child.
Back in my day, we didn't have, 200 personalities and names and everything. We had to make up our own personalities and names.
Well,
they were all G.I. Joe when I was a kid, No matter who it was or who you bought off the shelf, he was G.I. Joe. He wasn't anybody else.
To expand on your point about you becoming from a slightly previous G.I. Joe generation...
Thank you for that slightly.
Well, no, it really is. It's you're in the transition point.
It's not that far apart.
No,
really.
That G.I. Joe era is fascinating to people who started with Real American Hero as a collectible, not just as something to read in a book. So, for example, with me, I love World War II history. So when I found out that G.I. Joe originally was doing authentic World War II accessories, gear, and uniforms, and then its British counterpart, Action Man, was also doing authentic World War II accessories, gear, and uniforms, I became fascinated as an adult collector with that stuff. And so one of my holy grails that I'm trying to track down is the Action Man Colditz Escape set that comes with the checkpoint and the German disguise.
I know what you mean.
Yeah,
yes.
all that stuff,
Yes.
because I want 2 G.I. Joes to have one walk up and say, "Your papers, please." And then, I want that whole thing. Your papers are not in order. Like, I want,
We all have our own private bucket list.
Do you want to do each of our holy grails?
Hold on to that thought.
Okay,
Wait,
okay.
no, that's good. Hold on to that thought. In fact, let's try to end with that, because I think that would be a good one. Real quick, before I go on to something else, does anybody want to touch upon your very first time with G.I. Joe? And or did you have a sense of history with them? Are time is up already?
Oh, no.
All right,
He's
thank
going to
you
carry a
very
microphone
much,
out there.
and-
I'll do the mic.
Okay. Anybody? Bueller? Yes, right here.
Everybody can hear.
I was about back in '78. My mother got me a G.I. Joe doll or action figure.
Doll.
Okay, no, it's
The
okay.
thing is,
Kaiju, giant monster, it's okay.
Yeah.
it was just
The big ones are dolls. The smaller
Yeah.
ones are action figures.
Shut up.
it was about 4 inches tall. And the thing is, my mother goes, "Okay." I'm like, "Well, where's the other stuff that goes with it?" She goes, "Oh, I didn't think you wanted that." I'm like, "Huh? Where is it?"
I didn't
"Oh,
think you
I sent them
wanted
to
that."
your cousin." He didn't get them until 6 months later because the train they were on, because it was over in Germany, had gotten trapped in a snow slide. And when he got it, my aunt intercepted it. I believe the trash compactor did him in. She's like, "He's not playing with the doll and everything else." I'm like, "Why didn't you send it back to me?" "Well, I didn't think you wanted to play with it either." I'm like, "What?" But,
No. This panel is called The Joy of G.I. Not the despair of G.I. Joe.
But the thing is, I'm trying to figure out when did they decide to add all these other characters in? Because I only remember the commercials with just one guy. I was trying to figure out when all the other people came in.
You mean like Mike Power and Bullet Man? Or
Or
you're
Real
talking about
American Hero.
the little ones.
The ones in '82, like
The 1982, right.
Lady
There
J
were
and all them.
other than Mike Power and Bullet Man in the 12-inch era. There weren't any distinct personalities. There were like jobs. There was Air Adventurer, Land Adventurer. What did I say? Air Adventurer, blah 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 blah. And but there wasn't any. They were all just G.I. Joe. Unless we kids, I actually named my G.I. Joe, and I won't say what the name is because I want you to find it in the book, but I actually named my G.I. Joe, to give him a distinct personality. So I was way ahead of my time.
You were the Larry Hama of your day.
I know, really. So in 1982, on the file cards on the back of the packagings, suddenly we knew way more sometimes than we wanted to know about these guys.
And how many people cut those out and kept them in a little like recipe box?
Oh yeah.
This kid right here.
Yeah, there's no shame.
Right.
There's no shame. You're among friends.
Spoiler, his G.I. Joe's name was Clarence McGillicuddy. He had an ex-wife and a drinking problem.
He was also a recovering heroin addict.
With PTSD.
Joy of Joe. Joy of Joe.
I thought it was the joy of blow.
You win, sir. You win the convention.
Why does every panel I'm on end up talking about cocaine?
Because you're talking about the 80s. You're
Dave,
talking
I
about the
think that might have
80s.
Good
something
point.
more to do with you than...
Man.
Well, you also had the G.I. Joe Drug Elimination Force.
yeah.
Which was, it was kind of the very tail of Just Say No.
So you're going to tell us about your first time?
Yeah, sure.
With G.I.
So
Joe?
I was completely suckered by the first commercial I saw because it had the animation, which
What
I
year?
know was a big
What
strike.
year?
I guess it was 82.
Okay.
And I was
Yeah.
way into Star Wars at the time, but as soon as I saw their knees and their arms bend,
Yes.
I was all in from that
Yeah.
point on.
Yeah.
I mean, G.I. Joe's been like kind of a first point for me at every stage of my life. Like, it's the first comic I bought, which got me into comics. It was, I joined
out of nostalgia's sake, joined some G.I. Joe message boards in the early 2000s, which brought me to Dragon Con for the first time and meet up with G.I. Joe costumers. And then I got a job doing PBS stuff, and the first segment I did, the first geeky, weird segment I did was on the local G.I. Joe club, and that went on to, open a lot of doors for me, just doing weird stuff like the Dragon Con documentary and things like that I did for PBS. So G.I. Joe was the gateway at every step of the way for me.
Good. Let's do one more. Thank you.
Yes.
Let's do one more, and I want to ask these guys another question.
So I do have a memory of G.I. Joe, but I want your confirmation that I'm not crazy.
So, you want that before?
You might not be in the right place.
We'll do our best, but
you come and lay down on the rug right here.
So I was probably 2 or 3 maybe, and I think my dad's mother brought a G.I. Joe down from the attic that I think belongs to one of my dad's brothers. It might be my dad's, I don't remember. But one thing I remember about it is that it was in a wooden box. And I'm not sure if that was a thing that they ever came in.
Yes.
Okay.
The 12-inch figures had a foot locker that at first was made out of wood.
Wow.
So it was
in anticipation of their death.
And it actually was, if I'm not mistaken, big enough to put them in. But yeah, it was really cool, and it had little rope handles at first on the side.
Yeah.
Later on, they made them out of plastic, but the first ones are wood, and you open it up. There was a tray inside that had little. Like a lunch tray, it had separate little compartments, and you could lift that out. And you could fit a lot of uniforms and equipment in there. It actually had in the inside of the lid, it had a diagram of what piece of equipment should go into what part of the tray.
Wow.
Like the canteen went here, the rifle went here, and all that. But yes, those wooden caskets.
So you're not crazy.
Jim.
I'm not crazy.
Wait, you're not crazy about G.I. Joe. Maybe you are crazy.
I like G.I. Joe.
Okay, good.
It was just a very vague memory I had, and I couldn't remember. I remember very little about it. I honestly don't remember what the accessories were with him aside from that he came out with a wooden box. I also have no idea what happened to him.
Oh, I was going to say, where is that wooden box?
Yeah, I don't know what happened to him.
Better go looking for it.
He's buried in that wooden box.
Yeah, somewhere in the backyard.
War as hell.
Yeah.
Considering how many
I don't think
Joes,
my grandma would have gotten rid of that, so I don't know.
considering how many Joes met their end in a way that was involved with fireworks, I think maybe they probably could have fit in that box.
That's true. I want to try to get to the core of this book and this panel and that word joy. I want you guys to try to distill the joy of Joe for all of you personally down to that one thing. What is it, about G.I. Joe that brought you the most joy? Well, let's start with Bobby.
For me, as cool as the toys was, it really was the cartoon, the animated series.
Yeah.
That's really the Joe that I had was my favorite. And I just loved the adventure, the silly adventure nature of it. Yes, I gathered they're not shooting each other, they're firing lasers, not bullets. None of that mattered. It was just a cool adventure. And I love that. I love that kind of story.
Yeah.
So watching it, reading it, as well as writing it, that's my thing. And so,
in a way, that cartoon may have inspired you to become a pulp action adventure thriller
possibly.
writer.
That first miniseries is really, that's a pulp story. That's a very pulpy story with mind control and the secret castle up on the mountain with the giant cobra head, and it's all.
And the very impractical entry system.
Yeah. Well, it's like I figured Cobra had all this money to spend on these things to take over the world. They probably could have just bought the world. But But it was fun to see them try.
Like we kept saying during the Planet of the Apes panel, don't think that much about it, okay?
Yeah.
Right.
Just enjoy it and go. James.
It was definitely the cartoon for me. I liked that we got a backstory with the characters. Transformers was the same way, where you got he acts this way and he does this and he likes this and hates that, and watching the cartoon reinforce that stuff. So when you've got the toys, you can you basically know how to play with them. I mean, they have a bad guy, Cobra. And they've all got their cool code names and stuff. But yeah, I mean, just like Bobby, just more than the action figures, which I did play with. I think I watched the cartoon for a lot longer than I collected and played with the toys, though. It was just that fun adventure. It's a little sci-fi. It's a little maybe political thriller, more or less. A little fantasy. Just a hodgepodge of things.
For me, it was all about the fact that the Joes, and I've had a lot of conversations about this with my friend Tim, is that G.I. Joe built in a logical functionality to all of their vehicles and playsets, even in the small scale. So you had like removable engine covers, and in some vehicles you had removable engines, and you had logic to how it all worked. You could imagine how it all worked, and by doing that, you could create even more functional play scenarios. So the hovercraft really did float when you put it in water.
Yes.
So you could.
I had one. It did.
Yeah, and like you could get. This sounds a little sadistic, but it's true. Like there was one vehicle called the Awestriker, which was a desert dune buggy vehicle, and the engine came out for repairs. And at one point, I thought, while I was playing one day, I was like, yeah, they pull out the engine for an emergency repair out in the field, but then the engine slips off its mount and it breaks Crankcase's leg, and now how are they going to get out? Now he's stranded in the, you could just build on it, one thing after another, because they thought about the details. It's like, that engine cover comes off, this compartment opens, this seat has a seat
they
belt.
Had blueprints.
They had blueprints. Yeah. And the steering wheels, all that stuff.
Yeah, and I like, too, how the vehicles would come with a figure.
Yeah.
I always hated stuff where you had to get either the figure or the vehicle, and I could never get both. So I'm always just driving a tack track around with no He-Man in it or something.
Right.
That didn't really happen in the Adventure Team era, but my space capsule did come with that G.I. Joe. Well, the weird thing is I've yet to figure out what set that is, because I've seen a lot of those boxes from that time that says does not include G.I. Joe figures. So my folks may have gotten like a Sears exclusive. They ordered a lot from Sears or Penny's because there was no separate package for the astronaut. It was all one thing, and I know that for
they got a catalog bundle.
Yeah,
That's what they got.
It must have been, because he had no other uniform or clothes. It was just the spacesuit that came with him.
Right.
Dave?
Like Michael, the G.I. Joe comic is what really got me. It was that and Uncanny X-Men, but those are the comics that got me chasing comics. And in my head, Larry Hama's story in the comic is the Joe narrative. I love the cartoon. I watch it every single day. I've got it at home in the Foot Locker that Shout Factory or Rhino or whatever they were at the time put out. But the toy line is it for me. Playing with those toys, taking the elements that I got from the comics and the cartoons and telling my own stories with those toys, because that toy line is, to me, the most interactive, like you said, functional. You can just do so much with it. You don't just put the dude in the Jeep. You put the dude in the Jeep, and then you put a couple more guys on. You figure out where they're going to stow their gear. You get you
get their seatbelts on. Then you got to close the doors.
You turn the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Well, not on all of them, but you turn the steering wheel like on the Awestriker.
Yes.
And the wheels will move. There's so much. The little tube to the gun on the Awestriker.
Or even when you're sitting there going, okay, which team members do I need for this mission?
Who's going out on this mission? Who's getting kidnapped? And no, it was not always Scarlet or Lady Jade. Dudes got kidnapped in my world all the time.
Yeah. Sorry, Snow Job, not today. Maybe later.
The toys were just it. I mean, hours and hours and hours telling my own stories, staging battles, building out these characters, and just Destro was my guy, the guy playing the middle to me, because in my world he was playing both sides. He was not Cobra Commander's lackey. I always hated that depiction. The toys. Playing with the toys is it.
I think what I'm getting here is that G.I. Joe fans are control freaks.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, well, with most toys too, or whatever.
I mean, I am. I can't speak
amount
for
of
you guys.
control. You're orchestrating these things. You guys are taking the leads from the comics and the cartoons and then expanding upon them to your own things. And I'm sure as a kid you thought those were logical extensions, of that. Interestingly enough, there's a tiny little bit of that going on with Adventure Team. There's two things specifically that were out at the time. There was a Viewmasters set that actually had 3 little stories in it.
Yeah.
And they actually did give some names. There was Joe, and there was Sarge, and there was Greg. And there
Greg was a legend.
Yeah.
G.I. Greg.
And then there was a couple of recruits, and I can't think of the name of one of them offhand. It's like Jose or something like that. But anyways, but then there was also it was either Power Records or Peter Pan Records. There were book and record sets, and there was 4 of those. And believe me, I played those records incessantly, and those have Joe himself in there, just G.I. Joe, and then back at base there's a guy named Mike, which sort of presaged the appearance of Mike Power a few years later, but this is just a guy named Mike. There's a really great one called Rescue from Adventure Team Headquarters. Joe's out in the jungle and he's rescuing an ambassador off of a downed airplane in the jungle. And to get through this group of attacking natives, he asks for a distraction, for Mike to set up a distraction, and Mike pipes through a rock and roll record through the radio on the ATV. And I played that part of that record over and over again because for some reason in my little child mind I thought that was the coolest music ever, And they just, I don't know, they recorded something for it. This is little thing, and it's just blast. I turn that up and just blast that one part of it, and Joe starts to yell, "Turn it down now, Mike! Turn it down now! We're through it! Come on, turn it down!" And then he finally turns it down. It was brought up, but I like this idea because I'm going to go to it. Let's talk. Oh, yeah.
I just want to, as someone who's just a guy named Mike myself, I just like to flip the script.
Your middle name Power?
I'd just like to flip the script for a minute on something you pointed out.
Right.
You said that G.I. Joe fans were control freaks.
Yeah.
But there's an element that suggests. I'm not insulted by it. There's an element though that suggests that G.I. Joe, the way the toys were made us control freaks. They created OCD. When you get a sticker sheet for a hovercraft and it's got 50 little stickers that say no step, 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 and you've got to put those on with tweezers, or you get a tank.
Oh, you don't have to.
Oh, but you do. And then you get
and a magnifying glass.
You get a tank with a guy named Heavy Metal, right? And he looks cool because he's still got the sand on his face where the goggles weren't there, because of the details and stuff. But he comes with a helmet mic that's this big that plugs into the side of his helmet, and you're like, if I ever lose this, I'm going to have a mental breakdown. And then, of course, you lose it, and then you lose it.
In the 70s, we didn't have to put stickers on anything. They came with the stickers already on.
And all the accessories were like that big.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There was this insane piece of equipment. We were talking about realistic stuff or whatever. In the Adventure Team era, there's this insane piece of equipment called the chest winch.
What? That sounds painful.
This just went defunct. Kindle Worlds on Amazon Kindle Worlds, they had official G.I. Joe fiction that anybody could write. Anybody familiar with that? 5 minutes. Is that right? Are we going just 5 more minutes?
We can go a couple more.
Okay. We'll try to make
I've
this
got
quick.
5 minutes.
There's this really stupid piece of equipment called the chest winch, which is this harness that goes over the shoulders, and it has this gigantic winch that comes out, 4 feet or so, and with a hook on the end, and he's supposed to do. It makes no sense whatsoever because he's the support for it.
Yeah, I'm not a physicist.
He's supposed to stand
but,
neither was the guy who made the chest clinch.
Bullshit, he'd it'd break his spine.
Well, it sounds like something Greg invented.
Yeah. And that's why he's back at the base, answering the phone.
Careful now. I haven't said anything about that we had to have greater imagination because we didn't have all that backup material. But anyway, real quick, let's do a quick lightning round. I want a horror story. We'll go with this. Whoever mentioned that or whatever. I wasn't going to go with this, but I want one quick horror story from your G.I. Joe days as a kid. Something that happened that horrified you or didn't happen.
I've got one.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. I didn't get all the play sets and things like that, so I had to invent my own little death traps and traps.
Oh my gosh, are you telling this story?
I am telling you.
You're sick.
Go, Bobby, make it quick.
There's the old caulk guns, the metal. If you stand it up on end and there's no caulk in it, and you go, it comes down.
Yeah.
And you know how many clicks it is for them to let go and hold it. And if you click it one too many times, Destro goes boom.
My gosh.
Now he's reading novels. James, my horror story.
Gosh, I think the worst thing that probably happened is, anybody remember the movie The Boy Who Could Fly?
Yep.
Fred Savage's character is constantly having little military funerals and burying his Joes. My brother did that to my crap all the time. That's
what brothers do.
Yeah. He's 4 years younger than me and just a monster.
Horror story of G.I. Joe?
Yeah, when you were a kid.
Tiger Force.
Horrible. I guess my horror story is actually that all of my, because as I said, my dad was very supportive. I had most of the Joe stuff. It all went up in the attic, and plastic doesn't do so well with Georgia heat in attics, and everything. Just the flag was a warped mess.
Oh man! Oh no!
You had a flag?
I had a flag.
I don't feel sorry for you.
You shouldn't. I did not take proper care of what I had. But yeah, so many of the vehicles and everything were just didn't survive.
You're supposed to call those battle damaged.
They got slagged by Cobra.
We're going to stick with
Cobra
you,
lasers.
and we're going to come back down the line, but quickly, lightning round, Holy Grail. Either as a child or now.
And what I would want now is a fully intact killer whale. That's the greatest toy of all time.
I've still got mine.
My Holy Grail is the Action Man Colditz Escape playset with an RAF Action Man uniform character.
If anybody has one of those, you know where to find it.
Yeah, I want the British World War II 12-inch stuff.
He's got something very specific. Okay, James.
I mean, I don't collect anymore. I think my favorite Joe as a kid, and I can't remember his name, the scuba diver.
Torpedo?
Deep Six.
Wait, this is one that
Wet
you really
suit.
want.
He had
Aqua.
He had all the stuff.
Helmet.
He had the little aqua scooter thing and the hoses.
Yeah.
I love that.
He's awesome.
So you'd like to have that back as a Holy Grail?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
All right, give me a week.
Bobby.
Okay, as a kid, I would have said I would love to have had a flag. That was just so freaking cool.
My neighbor had a flag. It was awesome.
I've heard nothing but this thing about the flag.
There is.
It was immense.
I know.
It's longer than
I know what it is now, but it's amazing. It's right here. It's on the cover of the book. It's right here.
Oh, she's an angel.
It's one of those things. It's like I knew there was no chance in hell my parents were buying it for me.
Yeah, no.
But so that was as a kid. Holy Grail now as an adult in my profession, I want to write G.I. Joe.
Oh, yeah.
I love that one.
Yeah.
I want you to write G.I. Joe. That would be amazing.
Well, you used to be able to when Kindle World was going.
I wrote to him once. He never wrote me back. The guy's a jerk.
It's like Santa. Dear Joe.
Well, when I was a kid, I asked Santa every freaking year, every Christmas, for the G.I. Joe headquarters. This amazing thing that opened up and just raised up, and it opened up into these rooms and everything. And I got the Sears and the Penny's catalogs, and I used to sit there and draw it over and over. You know, I didn't like write my Christmas list. I drew them, you know, so that there was no mistaking anything with my parents. You know, asked for it, wanted it, and never, ever, ever got it as a child. Now, but I do have one finally now as an adult, but it's incomplete. It's pretty complete, but it's missing a few little things or whatever. But I got to meet a guy playing Santa Claus. I used to do a little radio show up in Toledo, Ohio, and a guy came on the radio. We did it where kids could call in or whatever, and I'm like, on the air, I gave Santa the worst crap he's ever gotten in his life. I said, finally, after all these years, why didn't you bring me that G.I. Joe headquarters? I don't even remember what he said because it didn't matter. Thank you so much for being here and sharing in the joy of Joe.
Yes. Let's finish this off though in classic Real American Hero fashion. Now you know, knowing is half the battle.
All right.
That was a fun panel. It's always a fun time talking about G.I. Joe. I could be on G.I. Joe panels every year. It would be no problem. Twice a year, they could do them at Joe Lanta. How have I not been on a G.I. Joe panel? Well, you know why? Because that's focused G.I. Joe stuff, and literally everybody there is there for G.I. Joe and not necessarily a real American hero. So that's how that works. But I could do a Joe panel on an annual basis and have a great time talking about G.I. Joe. I love it. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun doing it last year. And things are starting to come together for this year's Dragon Con. I have such a big, huge announcement to make probably very soon. And if you're a canny, needless thing listener, and if you follow along on the social media, the Needless Things Podcast Facebook group, myself, Dave West on Facebook, Instagram, if you keep up with the needlessthingspodcast.com, you can probably piece together what the biggest of big announcements is for me at Dragon Con. But I cannot make this big announcement yet because, as you know, the Dragon Con schedule is a mysterious and ever-changing thing. So, as of right now, nothing is concrete enough to say anything about. But again, follow me on those social medias, and you will be among the first to know. Needless Things Podcast Facebook group is probably the best place to do it. And also, please do check out 5/5 of the Princess Bride and the Casket Creatures. Always check them out. Mystery Men, mysterymenofsurf.com. I love you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Needless Things Podcast. You're the best. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Downcast, or in the ears of a Trader Vic's employee. Love you. Mean it. Uh-huh.